So that's where we are today. Exodus chapter 2, found on page 89 in your Pew Bible. Page 89 in your Pew Bible. And it's chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. Verses 1 through 10. I've titled this sermon series, Rescued and Restored. Because Exodus tells the story of Israel, who was in a very difficult situation. They were forced into slavery in Egypt. They were treated poorly. They needed God to go on a rescue mission to save them and then restore them after taking them out of Egypt. And it's the same for us, that God would rescue us from our sin, rescue us from our situation, and restore us so that we could have a right relationship with Him. And today we're talking about the story of Moses. This is Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. Now a man of the house of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. The baby's sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Then the baby's sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. And the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." May God add His blessing to the reading of His Scripture. So I remember one of the first novels I ever read was this little book called Hatchet. Anybody read Hatchet? It's a pretty cool story, short story. I read this, must have been in elementary school. And the story of Hatchet is about this boy, this 13-year-old boy named Brian Robeson. Brian's parents are divorced. His mother lives in New York, and his father lives in northern Canada. And one summer, this 13-year-old boy, Brian, is going to travel from New York to Canada in this small Cessna 406 Bush plane, two-seater plane, just the pilot and Brian. And he's going up there to work with his father in the oil fields of northern Canada. But while he's on the flight, the pilot suffers a massive heart attack and dies. And so Brian has to try and steer the plane and land it. Brian, being a 13-year-old boy, ends up crash landing the plane, but in the best place possible, in a lake. The plane sinks, and as the plane is sinking, Brian's trying to grab whatever he can before swimming to shore, and the only thing he can grab is this hatchet that his mother had given to him as a gift. So there's Brian, alone in the Canadian wilderness with nothing but a hatchet to survive. He's stuck between a rock and a hard place. What do you do if you're a 13-year-old boy and the plane has crash landed? So Brian must learn to survive on his own with nothing but his hatchet. He has to learn to make a fire with his hatchet. He has to cut wood with his hatchet. Everything he does at first is with his hatchet. And he discovers how to hunt. Using his hatchet, he's able to make a spear. Using his hatchet, he's able to make a knife and do all these other things. And because he's able to make a fire, he eats these rabbits and other small animals he's able to find. But he also has to ward off other dangers of the wilderness. Porcupines, bears, moose, deer. When you're a small boy, those things are a lot more dangerous, especially if you don't have any way of defending against them. He doesn't have a gun or anything. So this boy, Brian, has crash landed and he's stuck in the wilderness and he has to make the best of a difficult situation. Now, I don't think any of us have crash landed a plane in the Canadian wilderness, but at times we felt that our life was like a plane that was crashing down. And we've been stuck in a difficult situation. And so the question for us is, how are we able to make the best of that situation? What do we do when we're stuck between a rock and a hard place? You're faced with a serious decision. You're faced with a difficult situation. The options don't seem clear. Taking the road to the right doesn't seem any better than taking the road to the left, and you're stuck. What do we do? And this is precisely the story of Exodus chapter 2. A baby is born named Moses, and the Egyptian Pharaoh wanted all the baby boys of Israel to be thrown in the river and killed. But the mom loves her baby. She doesn't want that to happen, but she doesn't have any options. She doesn't know what to do. What will happen with this baby boy Moses, and how will the mother deal with this difficult situation? Well, let's get into the text, starting with verses 1 through 4. It says, "A man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When the mom saw that this boy was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. And the baby's sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him." So we know at the end of chapter 1, Pharaoh commanded the Egyptian soldiers to go through the Israelite villages and look for newborn baby boys, take those boys, and throw them in the river. So if you're a mom in Israel in that time, and you have a baby boy, that's a scary thing. Because what do you know about that boy? He's probably going to be found by the soldiers and thrown in the river. And it says that Moses' mom saw that he was a fine child. A better translation might be that she saw that he was a beautiful child. When a mom sees her child for the first time, that's a delightful experience. But for Moses' mom, it was a delightful experience mixed with incredible fear. What would she do to protect this baby boy? So she has to make a plan. She says, I'm not going to let the soldiers just take my baby and throw him in the river, right? But what options do I have? I guess I'll try and hide him for 3 months. So she makes a plan. And she's actually able to hide the baby for 3 months. Maybe she hid him in the laundry basket when the soldiers came around the village. Maybe she had to muffle his cries when the soldiers were going through the village. But I imagine one day the soldiers were right outside her door, and Moses was uncontrollable. He was screaming and crying, and she's trying to do whatever she can to muffle his cries. And she finally realizes after 3 months, I can't hide this baby any longer. So the plan that she originally made, she had to adapt it. And at first glance, you might think, what mother would ever put her baby in a river? Who would do that? But I'll tell you what, this mother's plan was actually pretty strategic and fantastic. And I'll tell us why. But first, what can we learn from what Moses' mother did? She made a plan. She realized she could not get out of the situation. She had to ask, how can I make the best of this difficult situation? We're inclined to say, how can I run away from my problems altogether, right? How can I run away from this situation and avoid it and not deal with it at all? Moses' mom couldn't do that. There was nowhere for her to turn. So her question was, how can I make the best of this awful, awful situation? It's the same for us. When we are stuck in a difficult situation like this, when we can't go left or right, when we have to face it head on, and we don't have clear options, we have to ask the question, how can we make the best out of this situation? Because sometimes you can't run away from all your problems, and you're stuck You have to deal with it. Moses' mother was stuck with her problem. She didn't want anybody to hurt her baby. She can't hide him any longer. So she adapts her plan. She says, I'm going to take this papyrus basket, coat it with tar and pitch so it can float, and put the baby in it and hide him in the most obvious place possible, the river. You might think the river's probably not a good place because people are going there to throw babies in the water. Won't somebody see the baby? But it's actually kind of a genius plan because nobody would expect to find a living baby in the river when all the other babies are being thrown in there. So she got very strategic in her plan. Her game plan was to put him in this little canoe and put him in the reeds. Now, the children's Bibles and the Disney version of the story get it all wrong. Moses never floated down the river. I used to think she put him in the river and Moses just floated down and someone was like, hey, what's that? I want it. I'm going to grab it. And oh, it's a baby boy. He didn't float down the river at all. Moses' mother is a little nicer than that. I'm guessing when she puts him in the reeds, she's thinking he's not going to move anywhere. He's not going to flow down the river. And so her plan is actually very smart and careful. She doesn't let Moses just drift on down hoping she'll hit the lottery and something will happen. No, she puts him in the reeds, and then she gets help. So the first thing we can learn from her, right, is that she made a plan, but also that she got help. And who did she get help from? Her own daughter, Moses' older sister. And based on what we know about the book of Exodus, she was somewhere between 8 years old and 12 years old. Why couldn't Moses' mom stay and watch by the river? Well, if you're a mom, you're of the age to actually be working. So the soldiers would have said, hey, woman, why aren't you working today? And so it would have been very suspicious. But a young girl isn't of the age to work yet, so she could have her daughter sit and watch from a distance and make sure Moses was okay, and nobody would think that was suspicious because the girl doesn't have to work, and girls were off doing what they wanted to do around the village and by the river. So if a soldier walked by and saw the daughter, it would be a lot less suspicious. So the mom made a plan, and she got the help she needed from her daughter. Now, it's so simple when we break it down. She made a plan and got some help. I'll tell you what, it's so simple, and yet we're so slow to do that when we're in a difficult situation. We're shrouded with anxiety and fear in these difficult situations. And what Moses' mom did is so simple. She stops, she takes a breath, she makes a plan. We can pray to God and say, God, can you help me make a plan to face the situation? And also, we can be humble enough to ask for help. But who here is like me and doesn't always like to ask for help? I would guess many of us don't always like to ask for help, and we like to try and fix it on our own. But Moses' mom realized she couldn't. And the best option she had to protect Moses, this baby, was to get the help of her daughter. It reminds me of my senior year of high school. I was stuck in a difficult situation, and I couldn't find out. I was actually very, very depressed for 4 months. I don't really know what triggered it. It was the beginning of my senior year of high school. I was supposed to be excited for this to be my last year. I was supposed to be excited for college coming up. I was supposed to be excited for this next season of my life. And I was depressed for the whole first part of the year. Now, this is what I did, and it wasn't very good. I made a plan, but I never sought help. I thought, I'm depressed. I'd never been depressed like that before. It was very dark. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, I couldn't smile, or if I did, it was a fake smile. And so I thought, maybe it will just go away after a couple weeks. And that's how I would deal with it. I forgot. I didn't pray to God about it. I just said, I'll let the depression go away. I know other people have gotten through this. I'm a big boy. I can deal with it. So I tried that for about a month, and it only got worse and worse. So then I said, well, maybe I'll just adapt my plan. Maybe I'll eat healthier and exercise and do all these other things that I learned about how to deal with depression. Maybe I'll force myself to get a solid 8 hours of sleep. Maybe I'll try and figure out a new routine or change up my routine a little bit. Tried that for another 2 months, and nothing was really getting better. So 3 months now, and I never told a soul that I was depressed. Might have hinted at it. My parents could tell that something was off. But it wasn't until I opened up and revealed to somebody and asked for help that things started to get better. So after 3 months of being really depressed and living in this with like a dark cloud over my head, not wanting to get out of bed in the morning or do anything, I finally called up my older brother and asked him, he was living in California at the time, and I asked him if he could help me with this depression. It turns out he had been depressed just like I had before, and I never knew about it. It wasn't until that 3rd month where I asked for help that I was able to start making steps in the right direction. And then it was another month before the depression started to go away. And then it was many months after that before I was back to normal. And I look back now and I wish, the first day that I felt that depression coming in, what would have happened if I stopped and asked for help? But in my pride I said, I can deal with this on my own. I'll figure it out. I'll make it better without the help of anybody. Big mistake. Moses' mother was a little smarter than I was. She made a plan. The plan was pretty good, but the plan couldn't be executed without help. She had to stop and ask the help from her daughter, and she had to ask for the help of God. I would guess that Moses' mother was expecting her plan to work for many days. Maybe during the day, she would take Moses to the river, put him in the reeds. The daughter would watch Moses throughout the day, make sure that he was safe. When the villagers came through the village at the day, they could come in to Moses' mother's house and see that there's no baby there, and she would be covered. Then at night, she could go back to the river, take the baby out of the reeds, and bring him home. Because they didn't have flashlights or electricity back then, and it was very dangerous to take a torch in and out of hundreds of homes without lighting something on fire. So, and it's a very dry climate, so it's likely that the soldiers wouldn't have been going around at night. So Moses' mom, her plan was very well thought out. And yet, she still needed help. And she needed divine help, which is what we'll see going forward. It's the same for us. Again, we have to ask the same question when we're stuck in a difficult situation. How do I make the best out of this? Sometimes you can't run away from it. So will you make a plan and seek help? And will you also look to God? The story doesn't end here, so let's see what happens to the baby in the basket in the river. Look at verses 5 and 6. It says, Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. And she saw a basket among the reeds and sent her female slaves to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. So I forgot to say this, but the river would have provided a nice background noise to be a barrier for the cries of the baby. So Pharaoh's daughter didn't hear the baby, she saw it. So again, this plan is genius. The river is a good place to hide because she wouldn't be able to. Nobody would be able to hear the cries of the baby because if you've been by a big river, it gets very loud. So you could actually mask the sounds of a baby. So the whole point, right, is to hide the baby, and the baby is now found. So we get all excited when we get to this point because we know the whole story. We're like, oh yes, the baby is found, finally. But I don't think Moses' sister is too excited just yet. She's thinking, oh no, somebody found the baby. And not only that, but it's Pharaoh's daughter, and Pharaoh's the guy that wants to kill the baby. So she's not excited yet. So don't get excited yet. Now, the daughter needs to adapt and figure out what to do now because the whole situation has changed. The baby that was hidden is now found, and this is scary because you don't want an Egyptian knowing that you have a newborn baby around, especially not a newborn baby son. So what does the sister do? The sister is the hero of the story. Oftentimes we think Pharaoh's daughter is the hero of the story, and she is in her own way, but the sister is really the hero of the story. Look what his sister says in verse 7. She says, she notices that Pharaoh's daughter has taken well to the baby. Maybe she was looking off in the distance, trying to gauge how Pharaoh's daughter is reacting to this baby. Maybe she sees Pharaoh's daughter tickle the baby and smile or play with the baby. And she has some indication that Pharaoh's daughter has taken well to the baby, and that Pharaoh's daughter might even care about this baby. So now she pops out of hiding, Moses' sister does, and says, do you want me to go and find someone to take care of this baby? Now we can get excited, because Pharaoh's daughter agrees to the plan. Now we can take a deep breath and say, okay, it's working out. And Moses' sister is kind of genius, because who does she go and get to nurse the baby? The baby's own mother. And so Pharaoh's daughter doesn't know that this is Moses' mother. The daughter went and got Moses' mother and brings her to Pharaoh's daughter. And Pharaoh's daughter doesn't know that this is Moses' mother, and Pharaoh's daughter hires Moses' mother to nurse the baby. What a turn of events. At the beginning of the day, Moses' mother brings him to the river to hide him. Baby's found by Pharaoh's daughter. Sister jumps out, says, hey, you want to keep that baby? You don't have baby formula yet. That's not been invented, so we need someone to nurse him. I know the perfect woman. Let me go and get her. Brings Moses' mother to Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh's daughter doesn't know it's Moses' mother, and hires her to nurse her own baby. So at the beginning of the day, she's terrified that this baby could be found by an Egyptian, and she's trying to hide him. At the end of the day, she's the hired nanny of her own son. Not only is she protected by Pharaoh's daughter from the Egyptian soldiers, but she's actually paid to nurse her own son. That's pretty cool. It's a pretty incredible story. It went really well for Moses' mother, because babies back then were nursed probably for a lot longer than babies today are nursed. They didn't have baby formula. They didn't have milk all over the place. They didn't have refrigerators, so the baby would have been nursed probably 3 or 4 years, maybe. So that means Moses' mother could be with her child for upwards of 4 years, getting paid daily to nurse her own child. Pretty incredible story. Pretty great plan. She got the help she needed, and God protected her. Now, not every story ends like that. So it would be wrong of me to say that if you do these 3 things, make a plan, get some help, and give your fears and anxieties to God, you're going to get the problem solved just like Moses' mother did. I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is maybe we can learn something from this story. Maybe we can learn something from Moses' mother. I'm not saying the outcome is always going to be the same, but we still have a responsibility to deal with our difficult situations in a way that honors God. And I would say that Moses' mother dealt with it in a way that honored God, and he honored her because of that. Moses' mother was stuck between a rock and a hard place. She tried to make the best of her situation. There was no way out of her problem, so she had to strategize and figure out the best way to protect the baby boy. And the 3 essential things that the mom did was she made the best plan that she could to deal with her problem. And I'm assuming she made this plan by praying to God as well. 2, she recruited the help of someone else. She got the help from her daughter. She needed help for this plan to work. And 3, she waited it out. She had faith in God. She put her faith and hope in God that he would see this situation through. So this is how the mom dealt with her problem. But what about us? What about me? What about you? One of the reasons that we come to church is to reflect on our own lives. And so I want each of us, myself included, to reflect on our own lives right now. There are real life challenges that each of us face, and some of us are facing today. Sure, some of ours are much harder than others. Maybe my challenge is on this level. Maybe yours is on this level. But we all face challenges. There's a way we can go about handling it that honors God. So let me ask, are you stuck between a rock and a hard place? Are you stuck in your marriage? Is married life tough? And have you made a plan for it to get better? And have you looked to God to help you? Have you sought help from other people in your marriage? What about with your health? Do you have people praying for you, like we've been praying for Sandy and Anita? That's a beautiful way, and for Pete Fagan, that's a beautiful way that we as a congregation can help each other. But it takes both parties. You have to ask for it. You have to seek it. Have you made a plan? Have you gotten the help of prayer? What about stuck with your job? I'm sure many of us, whether you're retired or not, have had plenty of jobs or situations in your job where you felt stuck. There's no way out of it. Maybe with your coworker. Have you made a plan? Have you sought help? Have you sought support? What about with your kids? This is a big one. I would say all of us have needed parental help, but not all of us are seeking it. Not all of us are looking for it. I need help. Isabel controls me. You've seen that. She's going to be a teenager someday. And what's something I've never had? A teenage daughter. But many of you have. I need to be humble enough when I get to that point to go to you and say, how do I do this? Can you help me? Some of us are in much different stages with our kids. Maybe our kids, maybe some of your kids are now parents. Your relationship with your kids when they become parents changes dramatically. I know this because now I'm a parent, and my relationship with my mother is growing and becoming something different. So now she needs help to know how to help me so I can help my kids. Are you stuck in a relationship? You have a problem with someone. You need to make a plan for how to deal with that problem. Or here's a big one. Are you stuck with your finances? Have you made a plan? Have you stopped and made a plan? Have you sought help? Have you given your fears and anxieties over to God? There's so many more examples we could give, but these are some of the major ones. And it's so simple. Just stop and make a plan and seek help, but how often do we really do that in these different situations? And sometimes the most important things in our life are the last things we'll make a plan for, like our marriage. We say, it's worked out for 20 years, it'll just keep working out, right? That's the most important thing in life, right, is your parents and your kids and your marriage, and sometimes we don't even stop to make a plan for that or ask for help in that area. So as we reflect, I want to ask you a few follow-up questions. Have you made a plan in your difficult situation? Can you stop and pray to God to help you make a plan? 2, have you asked for help? Do you have the courage and humility to ask for help? This is the biggest one for me, asking for help. 3, have you placed your fears and anxieties in God's hands? It doesn't happen overnight. When I was depressed, it was a whole month before I was able to really give that fear and that anxiety over to God. It doesn't always happen overnight. It takes work. It seems so simple, but you know it's not that easy. Some of us feel like our life is like a plane that has crash landed. We're just trying to make the best of the situation. We need to make a survival plan. We need to call out for help. We need to give our fears and anxieties to God. As far as I can tell, those were the only 3 things Moses' mother could do. Make a plan, get some help, and wait on God. And now I began the sermon with a story called Hatchet, and I want to finish it out a little bit. I won't give every last detail away. So this boy, Brian, has crash landed the plane into a lake, and he got a hatchet out of the plane. He swims to shore. Now, over time, he becomes a skilled woodsman, and he survives in the wilderness, not just through the summer, but actually throughout the winter. I don't know if this is a true story, but that'd be pretty cool. He becomes a fine woodsman. He builds himself a place to live. He hunts animals, and he makes the best of his situation. He makes a plan. He does his best to get help in whatever way he can. He's had to face many difficult challenges. A bear came into his camp and ravaged everything he had, and different things like that. Now, at the end of the story, a tornado sweeps through the Canadian wilderness, and the tornado is able to actually move the plane towards the shore, so that Brian, this young boy, is able to get into the plane and get whatever else he can get out of it. And he's able to find a radio transmitter. So he's actually able to call for help, and someone comes and rescues him from the wilderness. He made a plan, and he called for help. And that was all he could do. Many of us, in our situations, that's the best we can do. But at least if we take those steps, God sees that, and he'll honor that. When you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, will you make a plan, get some help, and give your fears to God? Let's pray that God would help us with that. Because I need help with that, so I would assume that other people need help with that. Let's close the sermon by asking God to help us with that.